The alley was quiet, as it always was after midnight. Not even the breeze dared to pass through that narrow space between the bakery and the crumbling brick wall. Trash bins sat like forgotten statues, their lids half open, sagging under the weight of yesterday. The scent of old bread and iron hung heavy in the air. That's when the scream came. Not a human scream, but something far more primal, raw, piercing, filled with something that didn't have a name. A stray cat jolted up from a nest of dirty rags beside a rusted pipe. His fur stood on end, his chest heaving, his golden eyes wide and blank. He wasn't fully awake. Not yet. The cat, thin, soot-colored, with a tail that twitched like a frayed wire, sat frozen, staring at the wall in front of him as if it had just spoken his name. His pupils didn't adjust to the dark. His ears flicked back and forth, catching memories instead of sounds. At the far end of the alley, a figure in a white apron paused. Julio, the old baker, had just finished cleaning his ovens. He leaned against the frame of his back door, arms crossed, watching the small creature that haunted his nights more than rats or rain ever had. "That cat again," he muttered, always waking like something chased him from hell. The baker didn't know the cat's name. No one did. He'd been around for maybe 6 months, maybe longer. But he came with no collar, no microchip, no trail. Just that scream, almost every night. And the silence that followed. The cat now walked in a tight circle, tail flicking. He wasn't limping, but his gait was hesitant, like every step had to be negotiated. He stopped by the pipe, sniffed it, and lay down again, though the nest of rags still held the shape of his panic. He didn't purr. He never purred. In the windows above the alley, lights flicked on and off. Someone muttered. A window slammed, but no one came down. No one ever did. The stray stared at the sky, where a sliver of moon peeked between clotheslines. It looked like an eye, watching. His body finally settled, bones folding into each other like dry paper. But even as he closed his eyes, something in him stayed awake. His ears, his claws, his breath. Sleep never came easily, and when it did, it came cruelly. Somewhere, far off in memory, fire crackled. Wood snapped. The sound of cages banging against each other echoed like drums in a nightmare. A younger version of him, a fluffier, brighter-eyed kitten, was hiding beneath a metal shelf, watching flames grow tall. Screams, human and animal, mixed into a single howl that refused to fade. A man's hand reached in, grabbed him by the scruff, not to save him. The dream twisted. The hand became a cage. The cage became darkness. The darkness pulsed with heat, then vanished. The cat twitched in his sleep. Julio stepped out into the alley, gently, slowly, like someone approaching a ghost. He crouched down a few meters away, not close enough to touch, just enough to see. "I don't know what you see when you close your eyes, little one," he whispered. "But it must be worse than anything out here." He set down a saucer of milk beside a slice of leftover croissant. Then he turned and walked back inside without waiting. The cat did not move. Not for the milk, not for the bread, not even for the warmth. But his ears flicked again. He'd heard the whisper. He'd smelled the kindness. It was just hard to trust anything that didn't vanish. As the sky began to pale and the alley turned silver with morning mist, the cat finally rose. He walked past the food. He didn't touch it. He paused at the edge of the alley and stared toward the horizon, where the street opened up into the unknown. Then, without sound, he lay down in a patch of sunlight on the stone, the only warmth he'd accept, and for a few seconds, he simply stared at nothing. That was the first morning Clara saw him. She didn't say a word. Just stood behind the rusted fence across the street, clutching her school bag, and watched the small gray body that trembled even in daylight. The alley was no longer just an alley. Not to Clara. Each morning before school, she made it a point to cross the street just a little slower. Not because of the traffic, but because she hoped, quietly, desperately, that he'd still be there. And most days, he was. Curled like a comma against the wall, always in the same patch of light, as if the sun had carved out a place just for him. He didn't sleep peacefully. His eyes would flicker behind closed lids. His back legs would sometimes twitch. Once, she even saw him claw at the air while unconscious, like he was trying to escape something no one else could see. She stopped eating breakfast. Instead, she packed little bits from her plate, scraps of ham, the corner of toast, a spoonful of eggs, and brought them in her coat pocket. He never ate them. At first she thought he was sick, then that he was feral. But feral cats hiss. Feral cats run. This one just endured. Like sleep was a punishment he couldn't escape, and waking up was just another form of exile. One night, unable to sleep, Clara stood at her window and stared across the street. The moon was full again. The alley was mostly shadow. And then, there it was. That sound. A howl that cracked the silence like glass. It wasn't loud, not like a dog bark or a human yell. It was strangled, muffled, but no less haunting. Her breath caught in her throat. Down below, the cat thrashed. His small body contorted, spine arched, legs twitching furiously like he was running through fire. He let out a cry, high-pitched, jagged, like tearing paper. Then he slammed against the side of a trash bin, rolled once, and stood bolt upright, eyes wide, ears flat, breathing like he'd just outrun death. Clara pressed her hand to the cold window pane. What kind of dream does a cat have that makes him scream like that? The next day, she brought something different, a sardine from her lunchbox. She placed it gently by the rags where he always rested, then stepped back. She waited and waited. He turned his head, barely. His eyes locked with hers for the first time. Not curious, not cautious, just exhausted. Like he was tired of both fear and trust. He didn't move, but he didn't run. That alone was enough to make her heart ache. Later that week, Clara sat in her bedroom sketching. Her hands moved almost without thought. She drew the alley, the crooked bin, the pipe, but mostly she drew him, the angle of his ears, the sharpness of his eyes, the silence in his shoulders. She shaded the darkness under his body as if it were swallowing him. Her mother peeked in. "Still drawing that same stray?" she asked gently. "You know cats like that don't live long on the street." Clara didn't answer. She didn't want to hear the rest. "He's different," she whispered. That night, the scream came earlier. Clara was ready. She rushed downstairs, barefoot, slipping through the door before her mother could stop her. She crossed the road and found him there, sprawled on his side, sides heaving, one paw twitching as though trying to scratch out of the dream. She knelt, slowly, careful not to touch. "Shh, shh, you're okay," she whispered. "You're not there anymore." The cat didn't wake, but his breathing eased. His paw went still. She stayed there, her knees going numb on the cold pavement, whispering nothing and everything to a creature that hadn't let anyone close. Somewhere inside that fragile body, war still raged. But for a moment, her voice was enough to hold it at bay. By the time dawn came, he was gone again. But the sardine was missing. Clara smiled. Not because he'd eaten, but because maybe, just maybe, he'd started to believe that waking up didn't have to hurt. And for the first time, so did she. It wasn't new, just unnoticed. The stone had split years ago, maybe during a storm or from a tree root pressing too hard beneath the earth. But one morning, Clara spotted it, and more importantly, what slipped through it. A paw, slim, silent, dust-colored. Then a body, squeezing cautiously, half-shadowed. It was him, the stray cat. He paused the moment his head cleared the stone. His ears swiveled like satellite dishes, catching every sound. Birds chirping, wind brushing leaves, the far-off sound of a school bell. Clara didn't move. She was already sitting on the grass, barefoot, her sketchbook in her lap. It was as if she'd been waiting for him without knowing it. He stared at her, long, still, unblinking. Clara held her breath. Then, like a ghost drifting into a memory, he stepped fully into the yard. He didn't come close, not at first. He moved along the edge, circling the garden's border like a prisoner measuring a cell. Every bush was inspected, every rock sniffed. He moved like someone who knew how quickly peace could become a trap. Clara watched silently. She didn't call to him. She didn't reach out. She just turned a page and started to draw again. This time, she drew the wall. She drew the crack. She drew him halfway through it, one paw in sunlight, the other still in shadow. For the next few days, that was their pattern. At sunrise, he'd come through the crack. He'd patrol the garden, sniff her mother's rosemary, curl once or twice beneath the bird bath, then disappear back through the wall. Each time he lingered a little longer. Each time he watched her a little more. But he never slept. Not here. Not yet. Then came Thursday. Clara was home early from school. Headache, the nurse had said. Truth was, her mind hadn't left that cat all week. Around noon, the sky darkened. A summer storm rolled in, not violent, but steady. Raindrops tapped the windows like someone asking to be let in. Clara went to the garden and saw him, soaked, trembling, huddled beside the old wooden bench. His eyes weren't on her. They were fixed on the sky, as if the rain was an enemy returning from war. Then it happened. He flinched. A single drop landed on his back and he hissed, bolting into a corner, his body pressed flat to the dirt. Clara stepped forward, slowly, umbrella in hand. She knelt, extended her fingers beneath the umbrella, palm open and still. He didn't move, but his eyes locked on hers. Not fearful, not angry, just raw, like the inside of something that had never healed. And for the first time, he didn't run. They stayed that way for what felt like hours. Girl and cat, frozen in a quiet truce, the rain drumming above like a lullaby for the broken. Eventually, the storm passed. The light shifted. Birds returned. He stood, shook his coat, and looked at her one last time before slipping back through the crack. But this time, he left a print in the mud. A single paw mark near her foot. Clara didn't step on it. She didn't wipe it away. She just stared at it, feeling as if something sacred had been left behind. That night, he didn't scream. Clara woke at 3 a.m., waiting for the sound. But the alley was quiet. The darkness was whole. And for the first time, she hoped he was dreaming. Not of fire or cages, but maybe of gardens and girls who didn't ask for anything except to sit nearby. Clara noticed it on a Sunday afternoon. She had been reading beneath the clementine tree, sunlight drifting lazily through the leaves, painting gold patterns across the pages. The cat was there again, his gray fur blending with the soil, tail twitching now and then, like a thought too stubborn to forget. She turned the page of her book, then paused. He was staring, not just glancing, staring, wide-eyed, unblinking, his gaze locked not on her, but on something far beyond, something only he could see. She followed his line of sight. Nothing, just the stone wall, the rosemary bush, a blue plastic flower pot tipped on its side. But his eyes stayed open, so open, they shimmered. That night, Clara sat at her desk, her sketchbook open to a blank page. She didn't know what she wanted to draw. All she could think about were those eyes, not just tired, not just haunted, but awake, too awake. She flipped back through earlier sketches, his hunched form in the alley, his silhouette through the garden crack, the quiet twitch of his body in the rain. Something connected them all. He was always watching, even when he should have been asleep, even when sleep came. It was as if he didn't trust dreams. 2 nights later, she tested her theory. She crept down the stairs at 1:14 a.m., barefoot, a flashlight in hand. She crossed the street. The alley was bathed in half-light from the broken lamppost above. And there he was, curled beneath the same rusted pipe, but his eyes were open. He didn't flinch when her light passed over him, didn't blink, just watched. "Do you ever sleep?" she whispered. No answer, just breath. Shallow, even. She moved closer. He didn't run. She knelt, slowly, slowly, until her knees touched the stone. She noticed something now. The way his eyelids trembled, as if held open by force. The way his back paw twitched every few seconds. He was exhausted, but he refused to give in. Clara reached into her pocket, pulled out a tiny plush mouse, the kind from the pet store. She'd kept it since she was little, for no reason at all. She placed it gently beside him. "Just in case you want company," she said. Then, slowly, she rose and backed away. The next morning, the toy was gone, but in its place, a single feather had been left. White, downy, delicate. Clara picked it up like a secret. That afternoon, he didn't show up in the garden. Clara waited, sketchbook in lap, eyes scanning the crack in the wall. Nothing. She waited an hour, then 2. Dread crept in. She crossed the street and checked the alley. No fur beneath the pipe, no yellow eyes in the shadows, just emptiness. She walked further, past the bakery, past the cracked pavement where she once saw him drink from a puddle. Nothing. Until she heard it. A sound. Not a scream this time. Not a cry. But a soft, rhythmic rustling. She turned the corner into the back lot of an abandoned building. Broken windows. Ivy climbing up old bricks. And there, tucked beneath a collapsed wooden table, was the cat. Asleep. Eyes closed. Completely. Peacefully. He twitched once, then again, but he didn't wake up. Instead, his mouth curled slightly, barely, like the start of a smile. And beside him, half buried in dust, was the plush mouse. Clara didn't approach. She didn't dare ruin whatever miracle had made this happen. She just stood there, hand pressed over her heart, and whispered, "Dream safe, little one." The rain came heavy and fast, not like the soft drizzle that had first brought him into Clara's garden, but a sudden, angry downpour that bent trees and turned gutters into rivers. Clara stood by the kitchen window, her breath fogging the glass, her eyes fixed on the stone wall behind the garden. Would he come? She had left the gate open. She had placed a dry towel beneath the bench. She had even warmed a piece of chicken in the microwave, slicing it into tiny bits and setting it gently beside the towel. Still, no sign. The rain beat harder. Clara didn't wait. She grabbed her raincoat, pulled on her boots, and stepped out into the garden. The world had gone gray, the smell of wet soil and rosemary rising like steam. That's when she saw him, not in the garden, but on top of the wall, perched, soaked, staring at her. His fur clung to his bones. Water dripped from his whiskers. But he didn't look cold. He looked lost. As if standing on that wall was the closest thing to safety he had left. "Hey," Clara whispered, raising her voice over the storm. "You don't have to stay up there." He blinked slowly. Then, one paw at a time, he stepped down, into her world. He didn't come to the towel. He didn't go to the chicken. He circled the perimeter, body low, tail flicking sharply. Every flash of lightning made his muscles tense. Every thunderclap sent a tremor through his shoulders. But he didn't run. He stayed. Clara knelt in the mud, arms by her side, heart in her throat, and waited. He moved closer, not directly, not deliberately, just a meandering, spiraling drift, as if pretending he wasn't approaching at all. Clara didn't move, until he stopped, just a foot away, close enough to see the burn scar on his left flank, faint, but there, pale against the damp gray of his fur, close enough to see the tremble in his front paw. "I won't hurt you," she whispered, barely audible over the rain. "Promise." She lifted one hand, slowly, like drawing breath through water. Her fingers hovered in the air, open, soft, waiting. And he did something he had never done before. He leaned forward, just enough for his nose to brush her fingertips. The contact lasted less than a second, a touch so light it might have been imagined. Then, without warning, he hissed, leapt backward, and darted behind the rosemary bush. Clara froze, her hand still outstretched, her eyes wide. Her breath caught halfway between a gasp and a prayer. She didn't chase him, didn't speak. She just lowered her hand and sat in the rain until her coat clung like skin. The bush rustled, then stilled. He hadn't run. Not completely. That night, as thunder rolled across the rooftops and the city slept beneath heavy clouds, Clara found the chicken untouched. But the towel was damp, not from rain, from a curled, silent body that had lain there, just long enough to leave a trace. In her sketchbook, Clara drew her hand, and next to it, a tiny smudge shaped like a nose. That was the night she knew. He wanted to believe. He just didn't know how. Yet. The doorbell rang just as Clara was drying her sketchbook pages by the radiator. She frowned. It was Sunday morning, too early for guests, too late for deliveries. Her mother answered with a startled, "Oh, Joachim?" Clara peered into the hallway. A tall, slender man stood on the porch, his gray hair pulled back in a loose knot, a canvas bag slung over one shoulder. His eyes were pale green, soft but sharp, like he saw things most people overlooked. "Didn't think you'd remember me," he said, smiling faintly. "How could I forget? You saved Peppa when she ate that Christmas ribbon." Clara's mother laughed, opening the door wider. "Clara, this is Joachim. He used to be the neighborhood's vet, back before the clinic closed." Clara stepped forward, hesitant. Joachim tilted his head at her, studying her not with suspicion, but with a quiet curiosity. "She's the one with the cat, isn't she?" he asked. Clara blinked. "He's not mine." "But he comes to you," Joachim said. "That matters more." They sat at the kitchen table. Joachim laid out herbs, ointments, a small flashlight. The rain from the previous night still clung to the air. Everything felt damp, even the silence. Clara told him what she could, about the alley, the screams, the twitching during sleep, the burn scar, the refusal to rest. Joachim listened with the patience of a man who didn't just work with animals, he remembered them. "I've seen trauma in dogs," he said finally, "in horses, even parrots. But cats bury things deeper. They don't scream because they want help. They scream because they've given up on being understood." He paused. "And yet," he added, "he lets you near him." Clara nodded. "He touched my hand. Just once." "That's everything," Joachim said. Later that afternoon, Clara and Joachim waited in the garden. Joachim sat on the bench with a small tin open beside him. Tuna, pure and unseasoned. Clara crouched by the rosemary bush, heart pounding. The cat appeared just before dusk. He came through the wall like a shadow reborn, ears forward, tail stiff. His eyes darted between them both. He saw the stranger. He froze. Clara held her breath. But Joachim didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply lowered his gaze, resting his palm on the bench as if to say, "You can run if you need to. I won't chase you." And to their astonishment, the cat came closer, step by step, carefully, watching. Joachim gently flicked a bit of tuna onto the ground between them. The cat sniffed, inhaled, then snatched it up, turned, and vanished back through the wall. A minute passed, then two. He returned, this time slower. A second flick of tuna, a second taste, a third. By the fifth piece, he was sitting 3 feet from Joachim, tail wrapped tight around his paws. His eyes never left the old man's hands. "I don't know what he went through," Joachim said quietly. "But whatever it was, it never ended. It just moved into his sleep." Clara's throat tightened. "Can he get better?" Joachim looked at her. "I've known animals that forgot pain," he said, "and others who carried it forever. But the difference, the only difference, is whether someone stayed long enough to remind them they were safe." He stood up slowly, packing his things. "He'll keep screaming, Clara," Joachim said, "until your voice is louder than the one in his dreams." And then he left. That night, Clara waited in the garden. She didn't speak, didn't offer food, just her presence. When he arrived, he lay beside her, not touching, but close. He didn't sleep, but he closed his eyes. And for a moment, that was enough. The file was old, paper yellowed, corners curled like dry leaves. Clara had slipped it under her coat and hurried home, heart racing not from fear, but purpose. She knew it wasn't exactly legal, but it was right. She laid it out on her bedroom floor, smoothing it gently. The article mentioned a fire that started around midnight. Faulty wiring, they guessed, though no one ever proved it. The building had collapsed inward. Smoke suffocated more than flames. But what chilled her most was the photograph. It was blurry, black and white, taken by a staff member weeks before the fire. Row after row of cages, some occupied, some empty. But in the bottom right corner, one stood out. A small gray kitten, pressed flat against the bars, eyes wide. Above the cage, a smudged tag, Ninor. Clara brought the photo into the garden the next morning. She didn't intend to show it to him. She didn't think he would understand. But she needed to be near him while holding it. Needed to feel the weight of truth settle in silence between them. Nino lay curled by the bench. He looked up at her, briefly, then closed his eyes again. Clara sat. "I think I know who you are," she whispered. The wind stirred the rosemary. A bee droned past. "You were in that shelter, weren't you? When it burned." Nino didn't move. "But you didn't die. You escaped. No one looked for you. No one even asked." Her voice cracked, not from sadness, but fury. "You mattered, and they let you vanish." That night, she placed the photo inside her sketchbook, taping it on the last page. Then she drew over it, not to erase, but to remember. She drew flames, bars, smoke curling like claws. But then, outside the cage, she drew a girl, kneeling, waiting, holding her hand open in the rain, and a gray cat stepping through the fire. In the following days, Nino changed. He still came at dawn, still disappeared before dark. But now, when he curled beside her feet, he looked up, met her eyes. Once, even rubbed against her leg before lying down again. Clara's mother noticed. "He trusts you now," she said, watering the garden. "I think he wants to," Clara replied. "But I don't think he knows how to stay." Her mother paused. "Some animals aren't waiting to be adopted. They're waiting to remember they exist." Clara didn't answer. She just watched as Nino rolled onto his side, his scar catching the light. Not hiding anymore. Not twitching. Just breathing. That evening, she drew something new. Not a cage. Not a wound. She drew a doorway, and Nino walking through it, into light. The storm was unexpected. It swept through the city like a shadow that had waited years to return, drowning streets and stealing electricity from every window it passed. Lights blinked once, then surrendered. The city sank into black. Clara sat by the garden door, wrapped in a blanket, watching rain slash against the glass like fingernails on a mirror. Her phone battery was dead. The house was silent, heavy with darkness. But her thoughts were loud. Nino. She hadn't seen him since the afternoon. He had left earlier than usual, tail low, shoulders hunched. The air had smelled of ozone even then, the kind of thick tension animals sense before humans catch on. Now the garden lay empty, save for the wind shaking the trees. Clara grabbed her coat, flashlight in hand, and stepped into the storm. The wind hit like a warning. Leaves raced down the street like frightened children. Water pooled at her ankles. She crossed the road, heading toward the alley. It was empty. No Nino, no sign of the pipe. It had collapsed under the weight of the broken gutter above it. Her chest tightened. She moved quickly, deeper into the back roads, places she had only guessed he might hide, behind the bakery, beneath the steps of the old butcher's shop, even the trash bins behind the shuttered cinema. Nothing. Then, a sound. Faint, but unmistakable. A soft, pained whimper. She followed it. It led her behind a warehouse, one she barely remembered walking past before. The door was chained, but part of the wall had caved in. She slipped through the gap, flashlight flickering in the wet air. There, Beneath a collapsed shed roof, half covered in splinters and wet leaves, was Nino, trapped, his back leg pinned under a fallen plank. His eyes wide but dazed. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. He just trembled. "Hold on," Clara whispered, throwing herself into the debris. She dropped the flashlight and used both hands to push the beam. It wouldn't budge. She shifted to the side, leveraging it with a rusted pipe. Her hands slipped, splinters cutting into her palms. "Come on," she hissed, teeth gritted. Finally, it gave. The beam rolled off just enough. Nino jerked free, dragging himself forward. His paw was twisted, his shoulder scraped, but he was out. Clara reached for him. He didn't run. Instead, he collapsed into her arms. Wet, cold, shaking, but still breathing. She didn't speak, just wrapped him in her coat, cradling him like a baby bird too tired to resist. She walked home through the storm, cradling his trembling form against her chest. Thunder rolled, but she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Back inside, she placed him on a towel near the radiator. She gently wiped his fur with a soft shirt. He watched her with heavy eyes, not alert, but aware. She didn't bandage him. Not yet. She just sat. And for the first time since she'd met him, he fell asleep beside her. No twitching, no screams, just sleep. Outside, the stars stayed hidden, but inside, a tiny warmth began to grow. And in that dark house with no lights, no noise, no power, Clara knew something had changed. The storm hadn't broken him. It had brought him home. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered. In puddles on the sidewalk, in the smell of wet concrete, and most of all, in the house. Clara hadn't slept. She couldn't. She'd spent the night lying on the floor beside Nino, her head resting on a folded towel, her eyes fixed on his curled form by the radiator. He hadn't cried out once, no screams, no thrashing, just quiet, deep breathing. But the quiet was fragile, as if even a whisper could shatter it. At sunrise, a beam of golden light slipped through the shutters and landed across Nino's back. He shifted, ever so slightly, his injured leg twitching. Then it happened. A low, muffled cry, half yawn, half memory. He whimpered, not in pain, but in fear. His paws trembled, his ears flicked, his breathing quickened. It was coming back. The nightmare. Clara sat up, heart pounding. He hadn't opened his eyes. He was still in it, wherever it was. Cages, flames, screaming. And just as he began to twitch violently, Clara reached out. Not with force, not even intention, just instinct. Her hand, warm from her breath, slid gently along his back, pressing softly between his shoulder blades. And everything stopped. His body stilled. His breath slowed. The cry, half formed in his throat, faded like smoke. He didn't wake, but his head turned toward her touch. And in that moment, without words, without even knowing, he chose to stay. She didn't move her hand. She let it rest there, rising and falling with his chest, a rhythm shared between them. And for the first time, Clara realized something. She wasn't just helping him sleep. He was helping her believe that healing could be soft, silent, slow, but real. That afternoon, she brought a small cardboard box and filled it with old blankets. She set it beside her bed, near the radiator. A quiet, safe corner. Nino sniffed it, circled twice, then stepped in. No hesitation. He curled into the softness as if it had always been his. And when Clara sat beside him again, he didn't flinch at her hand. He leaned into it. Later that night, when the stars returned to the sky, Clara watched him dream again. His paws moved. But they weren't running. They were walking. And he didn't cry. The house had never been so still. No television buzz. No clatter of dishes. No footsteps overhead. Only the tick of the old clock in the hallway and the soft, steady sound of a cat sleeping beside a radiator. Clara sat cross-legged on the floor, her sketchbook in her lap. She didn't draw. She just watched. Nino lay in the cardboard box she had made for him, head resting on his front paws, chest rising and falling with perfect calm. His ears twitched from time to time, catching the hum of nothing in particular. But there was no cry, no scream, no nightmare clawing at the edge of sleep. Just silence. And it was beautiful. It hadn't happened all at once. The change came like fog, quiet, gradual, impossible to pinpoint. The nightmares had become softer, shorter, sometimes just a murmur in the night, a faint rustle of paws before he'd settle again. And on 3 nights in a row, nothing, no noise, no motion, just peace. Clara's mother had started to notice too. "He's different now," she said one morning as she set a small bowl of tuna on the kitchen floor. "More here," Clara smiled. "Like the storm washed something off of him." Her mother nodded. "Maybe. Or maybe he finally knows this place won't burn." That evening, Clara turned off every light in the house. She opened the window just a crack and let in the night air. The scent of lavender drifted in. Distant traffic hummed like a lullaby. And through it all, the silence held. Nino climbed onto her bed. Not the edge, not the corner, but right at the center. He circled once, twice, then lay down, resting his head on her thigh. Clara didn't move. Her fingers hovered over his back, brushing gently, her breath syncing with his. She realized then that she hadn't drawn him in over a week, because the story had changed. He wasn't a shadow anymore. He was real, present, silent. Around midnight, she woke briefly, unsure why. Then she noticed something. A single tear. Not hers. His. It slid down from the corner of his closed eye and landed on her blanket. Not from pain, not from fear, but something older. Older than either of them knew how to name. She reached down, wiped it gently with the sleeve of her shirt. Nino didn't wake, but his tail twitched once, just enough to brush against her arm. And that small gesture, that wordless echo, said everything. He wasn't alone anymore. Names are strange things. We're given them long before we understand what they mean. They cling to us like shadows, sometimes growing into our skin, other times falling off when the world forgets we were ever there. For Nino, his name had been gone for years, burned away. It was a Tuesday when Clara found the old collar. She was in the garden, weeding along the stone path that curved behind the rosemary bush. Her fingers hit something buried, metal and brittle, hidden beneath the dirt and time. She pulled it out slowly. A small, charred leather strap. Buckled, broken. A metal tag dangled from its end, blackened but still legible. She wiped it with her sleeve. Ninor. 5 letters. Burned, but alive. She brought it inside, cradling it like an artifact. She set it on her desk, beside her sketchbook, and stared at it for a long time. Then she whispered it aloud. Ninor. The room seemed to flinch, like it remembered. Nino, sleeping near the window, lifted his head. He looked at her, then at the collar, then back at her, and something shifted. Not recognition, not quite, but a pause, as if the sound had reached a place deeper than language. Clara crossed the room, sat beside him, and laid the collar gently in front of him. "You had a name," she said. He sniffed it, slowly, cautiously, then turned away, not in rejection, but in mourning. That night, Clara didn't draw flames or cages. She drew letters. Ninor in bold charcoal, wrapped gently in the outline of a cat, curled, safe, whole. But as she stared at it, she hesitated. Something wasn't right. The name belonged to a past that nearly killed him, but he wasn't just that cat anymore. The next morning, she met him in the garden. He was already there, lounging on the bench, the sun catching the silver in his fur. She walked up, sat beside him, and said softly, "I think your name was Ninor." He blinked. "But I like Nino better," she smiled. "You've earned something softer." He didn't react, not at first. Then, without looking at her, he nudged her hand with his head. Just once. Then settled back down. From that day forward, she called him Nino with certainty. Not because it was shorter, not because it was cute, but because it was his. The part that survived, the part that chose to stay. And in some strange way, he answered to it. Not with a meow, not with a purr, but with a presence. Whenever she called, he came. Not always quickly, not always directly, but always eventually. As if returning to a name he didn't remember, but knew had always belonged to him. Some places don't die. Even after the fire is gone, even after the walls collapse and the ashes scatter into wind, something lingers. A smell, a memory, a silence too loud to ignore. That's what Clara felt as she stood in front of the old shelter. Its ruins were fenced off now, mostly forgotten by the city. Ivy climbed what was left of the front arch. The sign had fallen long ago, its letters scattered like teeth across the overgrown yard. But she knew this was the place. She had seen it in the articles, in her dreams, and in his eyes. She didn't come alone. Nino sat in the crate beside her, calm but alert. He hadn't cried once during the drive, hadn't scratched, just watched the road like it led back to something he'd been running from his whole life. Clara unlatched the crate slowly, placing it gently in the grass. He stepped out. No hesitation, no fear, only stillness. The air was thick with silence. No birds, no insects, just the distant hum of traffic far beyond the chain-link fence. Nino walked forward, each paw placed like a ritual, each step slower than the last. He didn't sniff, didn't crouch. He just moved. Clara followed. They slipped through a gap in the fence and stepped into what had once been the heart of the shelter. Only 2 walls remained. The floor was cracked tile, patches of moss where cages had once stood. And then, he stopped. Right in front of a burned, twisted metal corner. A cage base, unmoved. Clara's breath caught. He sat. Not curled, not cautious. Just sat, facing it. Minutes passed. Nino didn't move. His tail lay still behind him. His ears twitched once, his breathing steady. Clara knelt beside him. She didn't speak, didn't draw. She just waited. The wind picked up, whispering through what remained of the rafters. Leaves fluttered down. The scent of smoke, faint but real, rose from the earth. And Nino closed his eyes, not in sleep, but in release. When he stood again, he didn't look back. Not at the cage, not at the building. He just turned toward Clara and began to walk, away from it, as if at last it no longer held him. She followed in silence, the weight of something unnamed lifting from both of them. He had faced it, not as a victim, but as something more, a survivor, a soul reclaimed. It came suddenly, after weeks of peace. Nino had been sleeping on Clara's bed every night, curled at her feet or pressed gently against her side. No twitching, no cries, just long, silent sleep filled with sunlight and stillness. But on this night, something was different. The air was too warm, the wind outside carried no scent, and somewhere deep inside that peaceful silence, a shadow stirred. Clara woke before she heard him. She sat up, heart pounding, sensing something wrong. And then it happened. The cry. Not as loud as before, but sharper. It tore from Nino's throat like something trying to escape. His legs flailed. His claws raked the blanket. His eyes stayed shut, but his ears flattened hard against his head. "No, no, Nino, it's okay," Clara whispered, reaching out. But this time he didn't calm. Her touch didn't stop him. He clawed at the air, back arching, breath hitching in ragged bursts. He was back there, where it burned, where he couldn't run. Clara did the only thing she hadn't done before. She lifted him, gently, fully, cradled his shaking body against her chest like a child, wrapping her arms tight around him. "I'm here," she whispered into his fur. "I'm right here." He tensed, then softened. His legs twitched once more, then stilled. She felt it, his heart racing beneath her hands, then slowly slowing, the tightness in his muscles fading like mist. He didn't wake, but his breathing changed, and in his sleep, he walked through the fire, through the noise, through the cage door that had once trapped him. He walked toward something warm, a voice, a hand, a home. And when he reached it, he opened his eyes. It was still dark in Clara's room, but everything had changed. He looked up at her, not confused, not frightened, just present, fully, completely here. She smiled through tears. "You're back," she whispered. He blinked, then did something he had never done. He stretched his neck and gently licked her cheek. Once, soft, then curled into her lap, still watching her. No twitching, no ghosts, just sleep. It was the last nightmare, not because they vanished, but because from that moment on, he knew they couldn't hurt him anymore. Not while she was near, not while he had a name, a home, a story, not while he had her.